The wind over the Montana highline wasn't just a sound. It was a physical force, a white-knuckled fist that could strip a man of his life in minutes. For Caleb Stone, that wind was the only neighbor he had. He was a man with nothing but a patch of stubborn land and a past he'd rather forget. But on the third day of the 1888 blizzard, that wind would bring him something. Not a neighbor, not a friend, but a half-frozen stranger he pulled from a snowdrift, a woman with secrets in her eyes and frozen silk beneath her ragged cloak. He thought he was saving a simple traveler. He had no idea he had just rescued Seraphina Blackwood, the woman who owned it all. The blizzard hit the Judith Basin with the fury of a biblical plague. It was a white death, a churning, blinding wall of ice that had already lasted 3 days and showed no sign of stopping. The snow wasn't falling, it was attacking, moving horizontally, scouring the landscape, and burying everything beneath a suffocating shroud. Inside a small, rough-hewn cabin, nestled in a shallow drawer, Caleb Cal Stone stoked his meager fire. The cabin was his only defiance against the wilderness. He had built it himself, felling the lodgepole pines, notching them with hands that were now cracked and raw. At 28, Cal looked older. The war had taken his youth, and the West was taking the rest. He was a homesteader, a word that sounded like hope but tasted like failure. He owned 160 acres of rock, wind, and a small, vital spring he called Beartooth. It was everything, which meant it was nothing. The wind screamed. It found every crack in his chinking, sending icy tendrils of smoke back down the chimney. His 2 horses, huddled in the lean-to stable, stomped nervously. But it was his traps that worried him. He needed the meat. He was running low on flour and had been reduced to boiling coffee grounds for the 3rd time. "Fool's errand," he muttered, pulling his threadbare greatcoat tighter. But starvation was a more patient killer than the cold. He had to check the traps. He wrapped his face in wool, pulled his hat low, and tied a rope from the cabin doorknob to his waist. It was an old plainsman's trick. In a whiteout, you could get lost 10 feet from your own door. He stepped outside, and the world vanished. It was not darkness, but an agonizing, absolute white. The wind stole his breath, punching the air from his lungs. He leaned into it, following the faint line of scrub oaks that led to his traps, his lifeline rope playing out behind him. The first trap was empty, sprung. The second was buried completely. He was digging for the third, his fingers already numb and useless inside his gloves, when he saw it. At first, he thought it was a wolf, a dark shape, a mound against the white. He drew his Colt, his hand shaking more from the cold than from fear. He squinted, the ice needles stinging his eyes. It wasn't a wolf. It was a horse, down on its side, its legs kicking weakly, its breath a cloud of frozen panic. And half buried beneath it was a person. He abandoned the trap and plunged through the waist-deep drift. The horse, a fine-looking sorrel, whinnied in terror. Its leg was broken, a jagged piece of bone jutting from the hide, a killing injury. Cal's eyes moved to the rider, a smaller shape, pinned by the horse's weight. He saw a flash of dark hair against the snow, a pale hand clutching the saddle horn. "Hey!" he roared, his voice stolen by the wind. "Can you hear me?" No response. He knew what he had to do. He put his pistol to the horse's head, muttered a low "sorry, girl," and pulled the trigger. The crack of the gun was instantly muffled by the snow. The animal went still. Working with a desperate, frantic energy, Cal dug and heaved, pushing the dead weight of the horse off the rider. It was a woman. She was dressed in what looked like a man's riding coat, but the fabric, even soaked and frozen, was too fine. Beneath it, he saw the unmistakable sheen of dark, expensive wool. He scooped her up. She was terrifyingly light, her head lolling back. Her face was a waxy, bluish white, her lips cracked and pale. She wasn't breathing, or if she was, it was too shallow to see. He didn't have time. He abandoned his rope, trusting his instincts. He threw her over his shoulder in a fireman's carry and began the agonizing march back to the cabin, guided only by the memory of the land and the faint, darker smudge of his own chimney smoke. He burst back inside, kicking the door shut against the howling white. He laid her on his cot, his own lungs burning. For a moment, he just stood there, gasping, the relative warmth of the cabin feeling like a furnace. He looked at her. She was young, maybe early 20s. Her dark hair was matted with ice. He ripped off his frozen gloves and pressed 2 fingers to her neck. He waited. 1 second. 2. A faint, thready pulse. Thump, thump, thump. She was alive. All right, he breathed, his own survival instincts now replaced by a different, fiercer purpose. All right, lady, you're not dying in my cabin, not today. He began the slow, arduous process of saving her. He cut away the frozen layers of her clothes, his knife hesitating only for a second on the fine silk of her undergarments, finer than anything he'd ever seen. Her body was pale and cold, but he found what he was looking for, a dark, ugly bruise on her temple where she'd hit the ground, and something else. On her left forearm, just below the elbow, was a long, shallow gash. It was crusted with blood and ice. He cleaned it gently. It wasn't from the fall. The edges were seared, blackened. It was a bullet graze. Cal Stone stared at the wound. The blizzard was howling outside, but the real storm had just been dragged inside his cabin. Who was this woman, dressed in silk, riding a thoroughbred, and running from a bullet in the middle of a white death blizzard? He didn't know. He just knew she was his responsibility now. He covered her in every blanket he owned, heated water for broth, and sat down to wait, his Colt resting on the table beside him. She was unconscious for the first day. Cal forced lukewarm broth between her lips, cleaned the bullet graze, and wrapped it with a clean rag, and kept the fire roaring, burning through a precious amount of his hard-won wood. She woke on the second day. Her eyes snapped open, wide with a clear, animal panic. They were a startling, intelligent green, and they took in the small, one-room cabin with a desperate, darting terror. Where am I?" she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. "You're safe." Cal kept his voice low, unthreatening. He was sitting at his small table, carving a piece of pine. "You were caught in the storm. I found you near my trap line." She tried to sit up, but a wave of dizziness and pain sent her falling back onto the cot, her hand flying to her head. "My horse, Red." Cal's expression tightened. "He didn't make it. Broken leg. I'm sorry, Mom." Her eyes closed. A single tear traced a path through the grime on her cheek. She didn't cry for herself, Cal noted, but for the horse. "Who are you?" she asked, her eyes opening again, the fear replaced by a sharp, assessing gaze. "Caleb Stone. This is my homestead." "And where is this?" "Beartooth Draw, about 30 miles north of Grizzly Creek, if you could fly." She absorbed this. Her gaze was unnerving. It was the look of someone used to sizing up men and situations in an instant. It was not the look of a simple traveler. "How long?" "This is the second day. The storm's still at it. We're snowed in. Good as buried." She nodded, accepting the reality of it. "The wound on my arm." "Bullet graze," Cal said flatly. "Clean. Cauterized by the cold, most likely. You're lucky. An inch deeper." Her eyes became guarded, opaque. I fell. My rifle must have discharged. It was a terrible lie. He knew it. She knew he knew it. Her rifle was nowhere to be found, and the angle was all wrong. But he let it go. A person had a right to their own ghosts. Must have, he agreed, turning back to his carving. The silence in the cabin was thick, broken only by the wind's roar and the crackle of the fire. For the next 3 days, they were a world unto themselves. The blizzard raged, sealing them in a tomb of white. She told him her name was Sephi. Just Sephi. He didn't ask for more. He hunted, not far, always tied to the cabin, but he managed to snare a rabbit. He made a thin, hot stew. When he offered her the first bowl, she looked at the meager scraps of meat and potatoes, and ate with a slow, deliberate gratitude that surprised him. They talked, but they spoke around their lives, not about them. He learned she knew horses. She spoke of bloodlines, Godolphins and Dali Arabians, with an easy expertise that felt out of place. She learned he was a carpenter. He carved small, intricate birds from scraps of wood. It keeps the hands busy, he said, and the mind quiet. You're very skilled, she said, watching him work. Her voice was stronger now. You could make good money in a town. I'm not much for towns, Cal replied, not looking up. Or for masters. That night, the fever took her. The head wound. She thrashed in the cot, her mind lost in delirium. Cal spent the night bathing her forehead with snow-melted water, holding her down when she tried to fight phantoms. She spoke in her sleep, names and phrases that made no sense to him. No, Silas, you can't. It's my father's, mine. The codicil. It's a trap. Don't touch me. Get away. He held her hand, his own rough, calloused fingers enveloping her surprisingly small, strong ones. You're safe, he repeated, over and over. The storm can't get in. You're safe here. By morning, the fever had broken. She woke, weak and pale, her eyes clear. She saw him sitting in the chair, asleep, his head resting on the edge of her cot, his hand still loosely holding hers. She stared at him for a long time. This quiet, respectful man who had saved her, fed her, and listened to her ravings without question. He had asked for nothing. He hadn't pressed her about the bullet. He hadn't looked at her with hunger or greed. He had simply cared. It was a feeling so foreign, so dangerous, it made her chest ache. "Caleb," she whispered. He woke instantly, pulling his hand back as if burned. "Sephi. The fever's gone. That's good. You stayed?" "Had to. You were fighting the whole cabin." A slow smile touched her lips, the first he had seen. It transformed her face. "I'm sorry for the trouble." "It's no trouble." The air between them had changed. The storm was still raging, but the blizzard inside the cabin had broken. Over the next 2 days, they settled into a strange domesticity. She was too weak to do much, but she insisted on mending his coat, her stitches small and perfect. He taught her how to play a crude game of checkers on a board he'd scratched into the table, using pebbles and bits of charcoal as pieces. She laughed, a real unguarded sound, when he beat her for the 3rd time. "You cheat, Mr. Stone. I'm just experienced in the art of war, Miss Sephi." "I think," she said, her smile fading slightly. "I am too." He found himself telling her about his homestead, about the Beartooth Spring, how it ran sweet and cold even in the dry season, how it was the one thing of value he owned. He spoke of his dream, not of riches, but of a small, self-sufficient ranch, a place where a man could be his own boss. She listened, her green eyes fixed on him, with an intensity that made him feel seen. On the 7th day, the wind stopped. The silence was as profound and deafening as the storm had been. They both stood at the one small, ice-caked window, staring at a new world. The sun was a blinding white glare on a landscape of impossible, sculptural drifts. The sky was a brilliant, painful blue. "It's over," he said. "Yes," she whispered, and for the first time he heard a deep, profound sadness in her voice. The sanctuary was broken. The real world was coming. It took another day for the snow to settle enough to travel. Cal was outside, digging a path to the lean-to, when he heard it. Shouts. Men's voices. He moved back to the cabin, grabbing his rifle. Sephi was at the door, her face pale, the old, familiar mask of fear and authority snapping back into place. "Get inside," he said. "No," she said, her voice firm. "It's all right. I think they're for me." 3 riders appeared on the ridge, dark figures against the blinding white. They were leading pack horses and moving slowly, studying the landscape. One of them spotted the chimney smoke. "Ho, the cabin!" a voice boomed. Cal stood his ground, rifle held loosely as they approached. The man in the lead was older, with a granite jaw and a grey mustache. He swung down from his horse, his eyes landing on Sephi. The man's iron-hard face crumpled in visible, astonishing relief. He ripped his hat from his head. "Miss Blackwood!" he breathed, his voice thick. "My God! We thought you were gone." Cal's blood went cold. Blackwood. He didn't just know the name. Everyone in the territory knew the name. The Blackwood family didn't just own a ranch. They owned the valley. The Obsidian Valley Ranch was a sprawling empire of nearly 1,000,000 acres, controlling the best water, the best grass, and half the politicians in Helena. It was the biggest ranch in all of Montana. He looked at Sephi. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the foreman. Her entire posture changed. The vulnerable, soft woman from the cabin was gone. In her place stood a queen. "I'm all right, Jedediah," she said, her voice crisp and commanding. "My horse fell. I was fortunate. Mr. Stone found me." Jedediah's eyes cut to Cal, assessing him in a single, sweeping glance. He saw the poor cabin, the patched coat, the homesteader's rifle. His expression held a flicker of suspicion, which then settled into grudging respect. "Then the Obsidian Valley owes you, Mr. Stone." "I wasn't looking for payment," Cal said stiffly. The other 2 men were already unstrapping a bundle from a pack mule. They unrolled a magnificent fur-lined cloak and draped it over Sephi's shoulders. She disappeared inside it, the last trace of the woman who had mended his coat vanishing. "Seraphina," she said, finally turning to him. Her green eyes were guarded, pained. "My name is Seraphina Blackwood," I gathered, Cal said. The cold was seeping back into his bones. I can't thank you enough for what you did," she said, pulling a small, heavy leather pouch from inside her cloak. "This is for your trouble, for your supplies, for everything." She held it out to him. The clink of coins was loud in the sudden silence. Cal looked at the pouch. He looked at her face, now the face of a wealthy stranger, a benefactor. He felt a sharp, bitter sting of betrayal, not because she was rich, but because she had lied. Or rather, she had allowed him to believe a lie. The intimacy of the cabin, the shared stew, the checkers game. It all felt like a cruel joke. He slowly shook his head. "I don't take money for helping folks, Miss Blackwood," he said, the formal title feeling like a slap. "I'm a homesteader, not a bounty hunter." Seraphina flinched, pulling her hand back. The foreman, Jedediah, raised an eyebrow. Caleb, please," she said, her voice dropping to the one he recognized. Don't what?" he asked, his own voice hard. "Don't be the poor fool who thought you were just Sephi, don't worry, Mom. I know my place. The words hurt her. He saw it. But the gulf between them was no longer a few feet of snow. It was 1,000,000 acres, thousands of cattle, and a wall of money so high he couldn't see the top. We're burning daylight, miss, Jedediah said gently but firmly. Yes. She nodded, composing herself. She was Seraphina Blackwood again. Mr. Stone, if you are ever in need, the Obsidian Valley will answer. She let Jedediah help her onto one of the spare horses. She looked down at him one last time, her expression unreadable, hidden in the shadow of her new hood. Then she turned the horse, and without looking back, rode away. Cal Stone stood alone in the snow, watching them go. The silence of the world was absolute. He looked at the vast, empty white, then back at his small, dark cabin. It had never felt so empty. He went inside and threw the small wooden bird he had been carving for her into the fire. 2 days later, Seraphina Blackwood sat in her father's study, a room that smelled of old leather, whiskey, and power. The Obsidian Valley ranch house was a fortress of log and river stone, a defiant statement of wealth in the middle of the wilderness. But to Seraphina, it was a prison. The man sitting opposite her, sipping her father's best brandy, was Silas Croft. Croft was handsome in a predatory way, with a perfectly trimmed beard and eyes the color of a frozen lake. He owned the neighboring Bar Sea Ranch, a sizable operation, but one that paled in comparison to the Obsidian. He had been her father's chief rival for years, and now he was her unwanted suitor. "My dear Seraphina," he said, his voice a silken, condescending drawl. "To hear you were lost in that blizzard, it chilled me to the bone. I had my own men out searching, of course." "How kind of you, Silas," Seraphina said, her voice flat. She knew his men hadn't been searching. They'd been hunting. The bullet graze on her arm, now healing, throbbed. She had been riding to a meeting with her lawyer in Grizzly Creek, taking a shortcut when the shot had come from the ridge. She had panicked, bolted, and ridden straight into the blizzard's maw. "It was a miracle you were found," Silas continued. "By that, what is he? A squatter?" "A homesteader," she corrected him, her voice sharp. "Caleb Stone, he saved my life." "Yes, a fortunate bit of rustic chivalry." Silas smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Which brings us, regrettably, back to business. The clock, as they say, is ticking." He didn't need to elaborate. She knew the trap to the very day. Her father, a brilliant and ruthless man, had one blind spot. He believed a woman incapable of running his empire alone. His will was an iron cage. Seraphina inherited everything if she married within 6 months of his death. If she failed, control of the ranch would be turned over to a 5-person board of trustees until she secured a suitable match. The deadline was in 2 weeks, and Silas Croft, through bribes and blackmail, already controlled 3 of the 5 trustees. "You know my offer still stands," he said, leaning forward. "Marry me. Our lands combine. The board is dissolved. Your father's legacy is secured. Your legacy." "My legacy," she repeated. "Or yours?" "Ours, my dear. Think of it. The Croft Blackwood Ranch. We would be a state unto ourselves. And if I refuse?" Silas sighed, swirling the brandy. "The board will take control, and their first act, I assure you, will be to accept my very generous offer to buy the Obsidian outright. They will deem you unfit, emotionally distraught from your ordeal. They will break the ranch up, sell the water rights, and your father's empire will be scattered to the winds. And you will have nothing." He stood and walked to the window, looking out over her valley. "I am the only one," he said softly, "who can save you from me." Serafina felt the walls closing in. He had orchestrated the accident in the snow. He had tried to murder her. And now he was sitting in her father's chair, offering her salvation. "I will consider it," she said, the words tasting like ash. "You do that." He smiled, stopping at the door. "Oh, and by the way, that little homestead you mentioned. Beartooth Draw? My men tell me it sits on the Beartooth Spring, a very valuable water source. I'm negotiating with Mr. Stone to acquire it." Serafina's head snapped up. "That land isn't for sale." "Everything is for sale, my dear," Silas replied, his smile widening. "It's just a matter of finding the right price, or applying the right pressure." He tipped his hat and was gone. Serafina stood, trembling, not with fear, but with a cold, pure rage. He wasn't just coming for her. He was coming for him. Cal knew something was wrong when he found the first steer. It was one of his three, a young bullock lying by his spring, its belly bloated. Poison. He buried it, his jaw tight, his hands aching from the frozen ground. It was a message. The next day, a section of his fence was cut, the wire stretched and snapped. His 2 horses were gone. It took him half a day to track them into the foothills. He was being squeezed. He knew who it was. The Bar Sea Ranch, Silas Croft's men. They had been sniffing around his claim for months, offering insulting sums for his land. Cal had always refused. The Beartooth Spring was the only reason his land was viable. Without it, he'd be starved out by summer. He rode into Grizzly Creek, a raw, muddy collection of clapboard buildings. He headed for the sheriff's office. Sheriff Brody, a large man with a stained vest and a lazy eye, didn't even look up from his desk. "Poisoned your steer, you say?" Brody grunted, whittling a stick. "Probably ate loco weed, Stone. Happens." "And my fence? Did it just cut itself?" "Wind's been high." "It was Silas Croft's men," Cal said flatly. Brody finally looked up, his lazy eye seeming to zero in on Cal. "That's a heavy accusation, homesteader. You got proof. You see Dutch Malone and his boys out there with wire cutters?" Dutch Malone was Croft's hired gun, a man with a reputation for casual cruelty. Cal had no proof. "I'm filing a complaint," Cal insisted. "File away." Brody gestured to a stack of papers. "I'll get right on it, just as soon as I finish investigating the case of the missing chicken from the Big Horn Saloon." Cal left, his fury a cold knot in his stomach. The law was a joke. The sheriff was bought. He was alone. He was tying his horse outside the general store when a carriage rattled past, pulled by 2 magnificent black horses. It was the finest rig he had ever seen, and in the driver's seat, holding the reins herself, was Serafina Blackwood. Beside her, looking proprietary and smug, sat Silas Croft. She was dressed in a deep green riding habit that must have cost more than his entire homestead. Her hair was pinned up, and she looked beautiful, regal, and 1,000,000 miles away. Their eyes met across the muddy street. Cal saw a flicker of something in her gaze. Recognition, shame, a silent apology. Silas Croft saw him, too. He recognized Cal from the descriptions. He leaned over and said something to Serafina, his lips curving into a smile. Then he put his hand on hers, a gesture of casual ownership. Serafina flinched and pulled her hand away. But it was too late. Cal saw it all. He saw the wealthy rancher and the beautiful heiress. He saw the poisoned steer, the cut fence, and the bought-off sheriff. And he saw the woman he had called Sephi, the woman who had mended his coat, now sitting beside the very man who was trying to destroy him. It all clicked into place. She hadn't just been running from a bullet. She was in league with them, or worse, she was too weak to stop them. Either way, she had made her choice. Anger, hot and blinding, replaced the cold knot. He had been a fool, a gullible, lonely fool. He turned his back on the carriage, tied his horse, and stalked into the general store, never seeing the look of utter desperation on Serafina's face as she watched him go. Serafina rode back to the Obsidian, her mind racing. She had seen the contempt in Cal's eyes. He thought she was part of this. He thought she was Silas's partner. When they arrived, she didn't wait for Silas to help her down. She marched into the study and pulled her father's ledger. "Jedediah," she called. The old foreman appeared, his hat in his hands. "Ma'am, I want you to pick 5 men. Men you trust. Men loyal to my father, not to opportunity. Arm them, and bring the wagon." "Miss Serafina, what's going on?" "Silas Croft is trying to steal Caleb Stone's homestead. He thinks it's a minor detail. I'm going to prove him wrong." "That's Bar C business, miss. It's dangerous. Croft's got Dutch Malone on his payroll." "Dutch Malone was the man who shot at me, Jed. I'm sure of it. This isn't just about Mr. Stone's land. It's about my ranch. Croft is testing me. He's seeing how much I'll let him take before I break. He's about to find out." Jedediah's eyes, old and wise, lit with a spark. He had been waiting for this. He had been waiting for the old Blackwood to show up. "Yes, ma'am. 5 men. It'll be a pleasure." Cal didn't see them coming until it was too late. He was reinforcing his stable door when the first shot rang out, splintering the wood next to his head. He dove for the ground, rolling, and came up with his colt. 3 riders. He recognized Dutch Malone instantly, his long duster and black hat. The other 2 were Bar C brands. "Evening, squatter." Malone laughed, his voice carrying in the cold air. "Mr. Croft is upping his offer. He'll give you $500 for this rock pile. Or you can have a free funeral." "Go to hell, Malone," Cal shouted, firing from behind the water trough. "Wrong answer." The siege began. For an hour, bullets chewed his cabin to pieces. He was a good shot, but they were 3 to 1. They had him pinned down. They weren't trying to kill him, not yet. They were trying to break him. "It's getting cold, Stone," Malone yelled as the sun began to dip, painting the snow in shades of orange and blood. "We're gonna burn you out." Cal's stomach dropped. He saw one of the men circling around, carrying a can. Kerosene. They were going to burn the cabin with him inside it. He checked his rifle. 3 bullets left. His pistol had 4. It was an impossible fight. He was going to die on his own land for a spring of water. He thought of Sephi. The anger was gone, replaced by a deep, weary sadness. He wished, just for a moment, that the blizzard had never stopped. "Last chance, Stone," Malone shouted. "Go," Cal breathed, raising his rifle. "Hold your fire." The voice was not Malone's. It was a woman's, sharp and clear as a pistol shot, echoing across the draw. Everyone froze. Cal peered over the trough. On the ridge opposite, the one Malone's men had left unguarded, was a line of 6 riders. In the center, sitting on her horse, as if it were a throne, was Serafina Blackwood. She was holding a Winchester rifle, and it was aimed directly at Dutch Malone's chest. Beside her, Jedediah and 5 Obsidian riders had their own weapons trained. "Miss Blackwood," Malone sneered, though his hand had moved closer to his gun. "This ain't your affair. This is Bar C business." "You are on land adjacent to the Obsidian, Mr. Malone," Serafina called out, her voice dangerously calm. "That makes it my affair. But more importantly, you are threatening a man who is under my protection. You will drop your weapons and you will leave. Or what, girlie? You'll shoot me?" "No," Serafina said. "I won't shoot you. He will." She nodded to Jedediah. The old man's rifle cracked. Dutch Malone's hat exploded off his head. Malone's face went white. He was a bully, not a soldier. And he was badly, badly outnumbered by men who were not paid to harass, but to protect. You're crazy, he stammered. I am a Blackwood, Serafina replied. The last one. Now I will say this one more time. Drop your guns. Slowly, his face purple with rage, Malone let his rifle fall into the snow. His men followed. Get off this land, Serafina commanded, and tell Silas Croft that if he or any of his men ever set foot near Beartooth Spring again, I will consider it a declaration of war on the Obsidian Valley, and I will wipe the Bar Sea from the map. Do you understand me? Malone said nothing. He gathered his reins, his eyes promising murder. I asked, Serafina said, raising her rifle again, if you understand me. I understand, Malone spat. He and his men wheeled their horses and galloped away. Silence fell on the draw. Cal slowly stood up, his rifle hanging at his side. He stared at Serafina, silhouetted against the twilight sky. She looked like a Valkyrie, a warrior queen. She rode down the ridge, alone, and stopped 10 feet from him. She dismounted, her fur cloak sweeping the snow. Caleb, she said. He just stared, unable to process what had just happened. You came. I told you, she said, her voice soft now, the Sephi he knew. If you were ever in need, the Obsidian Valley would answer. I thought. I know what you thought. In town, you thought I was with him. Weren't you? I was, she said, her gaze unwavering. I was his prisoner, my father's will. Silas. He's trying to force me to marry him. He tried to have me killed in the blizzard. When you saved me, you ruined his plan. So he decided to persuade me. By threatening my ranch. By threatening you. Cal finally understood. The delirium. Silas. It's a trap. He stepped toward her. The bullet grazed. It was from Dutch Malone. He was trying to kill me. You saved my life, Cal, in more ways than one. When I saw you in that cabin, saw that a man could be good, just for the sake of it. I knew I couldn't marry Silas. I can't. I'd rather lose the ranch. You'll lose it? The deadline is in 2 days. If I don't marry, Silas and his board take everything. Cal looked at this incredible woman who was willing to lose an empire, but not her soul. The woman who had just faced down a hired killer for a man she barely knew. No, Cal said, his voice raw. No, you won't. There's no other way. Maybe there is, he said, a desperate, brilliant idea forming. He needs you to marry. But the will, does it say who you have to marry? Serafina's eyes widened. She stared at him. The codicil. I've read it 100 times. It just says, must be legally wed within 6 months of my passing to secure the Blackwood line. A slow, dangerous smile spread across Cal's face. Grizzly Creek has a justice of the peace, and we've got 2 days. Serafina's heart stopped. Caleb, what are you saying? I'm saying, he said, stepping forward, and finally taking her gloved hand, that Silas Croft wants a war. Let's give him one. But we're not fighting for your ranch. He and I, we're fighting for you. The Bighorn Saloon was roaring. The fiddle player was working up a sweat, and the air was thick with smoke and the smell of spilled whiskey. At the center of the room, holding court by the bar, was Silas Croft. He was expansive, triumphant, and buying a round for every man in the room. Gentlemen, he shouted, raising his glass high, a toast. Tomorrow marks a new era in this territory, an era of progress, of strong, consolidated management. A drunk cowboy clapped him on the back. What's the toast to, Mr. Croft? You finally buying the bighorn? Silas laughed, a sound devoid of all humor. Something even better, my friend. Let's just say the Obsidian Valley has been mismanaged for too long by delicate hand. Tomorrow, that changes. Tomorrow, the valley gets the master it deserves. He was reveling in it, his arrogance a tangible thing. Dutch Malone, his hat replaced and his mood sour, leaned against the wall. "What about the girl, boss?" Malone muttered, low enough for only Silas to hear. "She ain't been seen. What if she don't show for the board?" "Let her run," Silas sneered, taking a sip of brandy. "It's better this way. It proves my point. She's unstable, unfit, a runaway. The board will hand me the keys to the kingdom by noon. She's irrelevant." "I wouldn't be so sure of that, Silas." The fiddle music died in a painful screech. The saloon doors, which had swung open, revealed two figures framed against the purple dusk. The entire room went dead silent. The scrape of a chair the only sound. Caleb Stone stood in the doorway. He was not the grimy, snow-caked man Silas had seen on the street. He was clean-shaven, his dark hair combed back. He wore his only decent shirt and his patched but clean coat. He looked solid, immovable, and his eyes were fixed on Silas with a flat, cold calm. Beside him, her hand linked firmly in his arm, was Seraphina Blackwood. She wore no furs, no silks. She was in a simple, dark wool dress that she might have worn to the general store. But she stood with a poise that no fine clothes could buy, her head held high, her green eyes blazing with a fire that matched Cal's. "Seraphina," Silas whispered, his glass freezing halfway to his lips. He slowly set it down, his face draining of color. "And you." "Hello, Silas," Seraphina said, her voice clear and carrying to every corner of the room. "It seems you're celebrating a bit early. I hate to spoil your party." Silas's shock began to curdle into rage. He looked at her, at Cal, and then back again. "What is this? A pathetic last stand. You think you can waltz in here with this squatter? And change anything? The deadline is tomorrow. The board meets. You have no husband. You lose. The ranch is mine." "That's where you're wrong," Cal said, his voice quiet but impossible to ignore. He stepped forward, bringing Seraphina with him. "The board will be meeting, but not to hand you the ranch." "They'll be meeting," Seraphina said, "to congratulate me on my marriage." She held up her left hand. The entire saloon, as one, leaned in. On her ring finger, glowing in the lamplight, was a simple, hammered gold band. It was not a diamond. It was not a Blackwood jewel. It was strong, simple, and undeniable. A collective gasp swept the room. Silas Croft looked as if Cal had physically struck him. He staggered back a step, his handsome face contorting into an ugly, disbelieving mask. "No," he breathed. "No. You wouldn't. You'd disgrace your father's name? You'd marry him?" He spat the word, pointing at Cal. "A penniless, dirt-poor homesteader. A nobody, just to spite me." "I didn't marry him to spite you, Silas," Seraphina shot back, her voice ringing with conviction. "I married him to save my father's name from a vulture like you. I honored my legacy by securing it, and I did it by marrying an honorable man, a man who saves lives instead of trying to end them. Something you know nothing about." "This won't stand," Silas roared, finally finding his voice. He was shaking, his carefully constructed world collapsing around him. This sham! I'll have it annulled! I'll tell the board you were coerced! I'll have him arrested!" "On what ground, Silas?" Cal asked, stepping in front of Seraphina as Silas took an aggressive step forward. "He's right, he's a homesteader," Cal said to the room. "And this," he said, holding up Seraphina's hand, "is Mrs. Seraphina Stone. We were married an hour ago by Judge Peters. It is legal. It is binding." You trick!" Silas shrieked. He looked wildly around, his eyes landing on Dutch Malone. "Dutch, don't just stand there. He's what, Mr. Croft?" A new voice boomed. The crowd parted. Sheriff Brody stood there, his hand not on his gun, but his expression uncharacteristically grim. Beside him, his hat in his hands, was Jedediah Finch. "Brody!" Silas barked, a wave of relief washing over him. He pointed a shaking finger at Cal. "Thank God! Arrest this man. He has forced Miss Blackwood into a sham marriage. He's trying to steal her ranch." Brody didn't move. He just looked at Silas with a tired, weary expression. "That's not what the judge says, Silas. He says Mrs. Stone looked mighty happy." "No, I'm not here for him." "Then what?" "We found him, Mr. Croft," Jedediah Finch said, his old voice cutting through the tension. "The third man you sent. The one who wasn't as loyal as Malone." Dutch Malone, by the wall, suddenly looked like a cornered rat, his eyes darting to the back door. "A Bar C rider," Jedediah continued, his gaze locking with Silas's. "Name of Slim Jenkins. He was hiding out in the pass, terrified you'd silence him for good. Took a bit of convincing, but he was real happy to trade his testimony for protection. He signed a full confession about the ambush, about the orders you gave to shoot Miss Blackwood's horse, and to shoot her if she put up a fight. He even told us how much you paid him." The saloon was utterly silent. You could hear the saloon's clock ticking. Silas Croft's face had gone the color of ash. That's a lie. He's a drunk, a liar." "I don't think so, Mr. Croft," Sheriff Brody said, finally moving. He pulled a set of handcuffs from his belt, the click of the metal loud in the room. "Because that confession finally makes sense of all the other complaints I've been neglecting. Starting with Mr. Stone's, destruction of property, poisoning of livestock, and now, attempted murder. Conspiracy. Silas Croft, you're under arrest." For a single second, Silas stood frozen. Then, with a guttural roar of pure, primal rage, he lunged. He wasn't lunging for the door. He was lunging for Seraphina. Cal moved faster than anyone thought possible. He didn't just block the path. He stepped into the attack, using Silas's own momentum against him. He grabbed Silas's outstretched arm, twisted, and spun him around, slamming him hard against the bar. A pistol, which Silas had been desperately trying to draw from his coat, clattered to the floor. Silas, blind with fury, tried to swing his other arm, but Cal was a soldier, not a brawler. He didn't punch. He simply subdued. He pinned Silas against the bar with a forearm to the throat, holding him there, gasping and powerless. "It's over, Croft," Cal said, his voice low and final. Brody and Jedediah surged forward, pulling Silas's arms behind him and snapping the cuffs on. The fight was over before it had even begun. The saloon was silent for one more beat, and then it exploded. An old homesteader in the back let out a "Yee-haw!" and the entire room erupted in cheers. Men who had lived under Croft's thumb for years surged forward, clapping Cal on the back, shaking his hand. "About time, Stone." "Well done, son." "God bless you, Mrs. Stone." Brody hauled the sputtering, defeated Silas Croft to his feet. "Welcome to Grizzly Creek, Mr. and Mrs. Stone. The town owes you." He dragged Silas out into the night. Dutch Malone had, at some point, vanished into the shadows. As the crowd began to celebrate for real, Cal took Seraphina's hand and quietly led her out of the saloon, onto the boardwalk. The night air was cold and clean. The stars over the mountains looked close enough to touch. They stood in the quiet for a long moment, just breathing. Finally, Cal turned to her, his expression serious, the joy of the victory fading. "Sephi," he started, his voice rough. "Caleb," she said, her eyes searching his. This is your world, the Obsidian, 1,000,000 acres, all these people." He gestured to the town. I'm a homesteader, a carpenter. I've got 160 acres of rock and a one-room cabin. It's a very good cabin, she whispered, a small smile playing on her lips. He didn't smile back. This marriage, it was a tool, a way to win this fight. I meant what I said to that judge, but I won't hold you to it. It's not a cage for you. When you're safe, when this is all settled, we can get it annulled. Quietly. No one has to know. You'll have your ranch back. You'll be free. Serafina stared at him, her smile fading. She looked, for a second, almost angry. A cage, she said, her voice dropping. Caleb Stone, for my entire life, I have been Serafina Blackwood, the heiress. I was a prize to be won, a title to be claimed. That was a cage. Silas was building another one. My father, in his own way, built one for me. She stepped closer, taking his rough, calloused hands in her own. The last 2 weeks, first in that cabin, being Sephi, the woman who mends coats and plays checkers, and then tonight, standing by your side. That is the first time in my entire life I have ever felt free. She looked up at him, her green eyes shining in the starlight. I am not annulling anything. Serafina Blackwood was a property. Mrs. Stone. She tested the name, her smile returning. Sephi Stone. She's just a woman. A woman who, I think, is very much in love with her husband. Cal's breath caught. He looked down at her, seeing not the heiress, not the queen, but the woman he had pulled from the snow, the woman who had fought for him, the woman who had chosen him. He raised her left hand and looked at the simple gold band, then at his own hand holding hers. It looks right, he said, his voice thick. It feels right, she replied. He finally smiled, a real slow smile that lit his entire face. Well, in that case, Mrs. Stone. He lowered his head and kissed her, right there on the boardwalk of Grizzly Creek. It wasn't a kiss of victory or of relief. It was a kiss of beginning, a promise of a shared future, built not on land or on titles, but on something as strong and as stubborn as the bare-tooth spring itself. And that's how a simple act of kindness in the middle of a killer blizzard rewrote the future of an entire territory. Caleb Stone went out to check his traps and came back with a destiny he never knew he wanted. And Serafina Blackwood, a woman who owned everything, finally found the one thing she couldn't buy, a love as strong and unyielding as the Montana wilderness itself. They say that the new Obsidian Valley Ranch, run by Mr. and Mrs. Stone, became the most respected and the most powerful in the West. Not because of its size, but because it was run by a man with a homesteader's integrity and a woman with a queen's strength. What did you think of Cal and Serafina's story? Do you believe that one good deed can truly change your life? Let me know in the comments below what your favorite part of this Wild West romance was. And if you love stories about karmic justice, hidden identities, and romance against all odds, please hit that like button, share this video with a friend who needs a great story, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel and ring that bell. We have so many more stories to tell, and you don't want to miss a single one. Thanks for listening.